Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast, a conversation aimed at understanding all sides of mental health, addiction recovery, and homelessness. Each interview will include one's personal experiences and insights, or an expert's advice and knowledge within one of these fields. The goal is to promote awareness, guidance, and support for anyone who is affected by these challenges. Thank you all for listening. Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brendan.cutuli, and we're here today for Season 2, Episode number 24, with Linda Balliro. Linda is an associate professor of voice at Berkelee College of Music and a private vocal consultant. Linda has found her talents as a coach by helping her students communicate their ideas, emotions, and experiences together. Linda is joining the Mental Insights Podcast to speak about the power of art in developing calmness and awareness, and what role survival instincts can play in skill development. Linda, thank you for taking this time to be here today on the Mental Insights Podcast.
Great. I'm happy to be here, Brendan. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I think this will be a new topic of conversation for my audience, and it will definitely bring about a new perspective in terms of how people can work through whatever emotions, thoughts that they are dealing with, and using the power of art to do so, which definitely brings a way in which really helps people. Actually, the guest that is right before you in episode number 23 was a musician, and he spoke about how that was a great creative tool in order for him to heal through trauma. So this is a good kind of transition in how you're able to coach people do that in and of itself. So to really start off this conversation, what benefits can really be seen from singing, from the arts? What do you see in which the power of that can have into place into anybody using these tools?
Right. Well, the arts, and particularly I think music and singing, have a tremendous effect on our neurology because they involve more sections of the brain than many other things do. And so it's quite shocking for me to find out that singing involves more aspects of the brain than most other activities. And the benefit of that is that when you have some habits of the neural pathways that you've been using for your whole life, they're forced to change because of doing this activity. This is a motor skill. Music and singing are motor skills, and that's like playing tennis or riding a bicycle, but it's like on steroids. So when you do these kind of activities, you have an access to your actual neurological structure that you wouldn't get from other activities. So there's the emotional aspect and the physical aspect of doing creative things, intellectual, physical, emotional aspects, but there's also this neurological aspect that many people are not aware of, and that's why I like talking about it. So I wanted to say one other thing is that I came to this subject of singing in neuroscience because I was really intrigued with why my students change so much when they learn to sing well. So I've had many, many examples of teaching, for example, teenagers who are having some extreme shyness or ADD or ADHD issues. And after they were studying with me for a few years and they were graduating high school, the mothers would be very emotional with me. They'd come up to me crying, "You have no idea what an impact you had on her life," and all these things. And I'm thinking, this can't just be me doing something. My personality is not so great that I can do all that through personality. So it's not me. So what the heck is going on here? And many voice teachers will tell you similar stories, so it's definitely not something to do with my personality. So that's what led me down the path of what is this? What's happening here? And I found out these two things. And the first one is what I just explained to you. It's a motor skill. And the motor skill uses a high degree of the sensory cortex, and it creates new neural pathways, and it changes the way our brain is working. So that's an actual, been studied in the MRIs, and it's an actual thing that actually physically happens to us from doing music and singing, particularly singing. And so that's how I got down this road.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Linda. And you did touch into a little bit about, what we're going to be speaking about in this episode. You created change within students and you were trying to look for why. And I think nowadays we are seeing more children really experiencing new challenges that have to, be kind of challenged in new ways in which, there is a lot more, people experiencing ADD, ADHD, and, to touch upon what you kind of are bringing a new light towards, what kind of, stresses and anxieties are people facing today? And, you're speaking about how the creative measures of singing, of the arts, can do that, but what are people really facing today in which, these measures are truly healing them?
Well, I think that in the last 4 months is really different than it was before that. So I'll talk a little bit about both, just so because some of the things that were happening before are obviously still going on, and there's some different stuff too. So let's talk about before COVID and before shutdowns. Music and singing has a tremendous effect on people who have had trauma. Just like you mentioned, your guest last week was talking about his own trauma and healing that with music and playing. Absolutely. And the reason it goes back to this changing in the neural pathways, you know, and I'm sure your listeners know as well, that we're dealing with what's changes that have occurred in the amygdala. So when we have a traumatic experience, severe trauma, and we have a PTSD reaction, there is changes to the amygdala. They see that on the MRIs. And so the question for neuroscience and for scientists has been, well, now what are we going to do? Because that is an unconscious part of the brain, and how are we going to deal with that? You know, when I was a college student, they believed that this could not be changed. They did not know the brain had plasticity. So all of this is all in the last 10 to 15 years that they even found out that the brain has plasticity and can change. So if you've had a traumatic past or experience and you have PTSD, singing and music in any actually complex motor skill is going to start accessing these unconscious parts of your brain and using them in different ways. So that's why we see these neurological changes, because the sensory cortex is involved and very, very busy. And so when we're trying to, for example, learn how to ride a bicycle, I have this example in the book. Voice teachers use it a lot, but I kind of went into the science behind it. You get on the bicycle, and you don't know how to ride, and if nobody's holding the bicycle, it's seemingly impossible for you to hold it up or to go on two wheels. It seems like a crazy thing. How could anyone do that? But when someone's holding the bicycle, you're able to relax enough that your sensory cortex starts working. Your intellect isn't working because you don't know what the hell to do, and there's no analytical way to figure out how to ride a bicycle. So you can't be analytical, you can't be intellectual about it. And your emotions relax because your dad or your mother or your sister, your brother is there holding the bicycle. And so the sensory cortex starts working. And what it's doing is collecting data from your body. So it's collecting the data. How heavy is this bicycle? What's this feeling of the gravity against the ground? What do the pedals feel like? What do the handlebars feel like? All this information is going in. And when the sensory cortex gets this data, it sends back the messages to the muscles to self-correct, to correct things. So your body, internal muscles and skeletal systems of your body are making these fine-tuning adjustments that allow you to balance. And that's all happening in the sensory cortex, and then sensory cortex communicating with other parts of the brain. And so it's not really conscious. I mean, it is conscious, it's not unconscious, but it's not something we're thinking about. Thinking about is in the prefrontal cortex, a different part of the brain. So when we're turning off that analytical part of the brain, we're changing things very quickly. And singing and playing an instrument are like that. Another activity that is like that is photography. It's amazing, but not your iPhone. It can be your iPhone. There's a few adjustments you can make, but using a digital camera where you have to make the adjustments and figure out um, how much opening of the lens to do and the technical aspects, this has also been shown to create new neural pathways and change cognition. And they, again, they did studies. All the things I'm talking about have been studied and shown through MRIs and other tests.
Wonderful.
Does
Thank
that
you
make
for
sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
It definitely brings more context in terms of, the changes that it currently makes. And, in speaking about how this is physically changing us in terms of emotionally, how is music and the arts able to calm us? How is that able to work through, bringing oneself to be centered and to, ground oneself within whatever else they may be struggling with?
Hmm. Right. Well, there's the two aspects of it. There's music that affects you emotionally, and there's doing music or singing that is actually changing the neural pathways. And so that's an unconscious effect on you, physical effect, physical changes, which is what is so hard about having trauma, PTSD and trauma, is that it's actually physical changes that we need to access and change. So emotionally, the music affects you because, again, it makes physical changes. So when you listen to music, if you're working as a listener, not as a doer, although the doer is the same, I'm sorry, it changes your heart rate, it changes your breathing rate, changes everything in that kind of system here. So if you're having some panic or anxiety and you put on music and you're able to actually focus on the beat, your panic will go down. It will stop because your respiration and your heart rate is going to match the music. Now, it's really hard to focus if you're having that level of anxiety or a panic feeling, but you can do it. You can do it with a little practice. It just takes a little bit of a, a willingness to submit to a movement. So if you're someone wants to use listening to music as a means of calming your mind, movement will contribute to that for all the reasons I just explained. So if you put on the music and you're not able to calm, and you're not able to focus, get up and walk around the room. And if you're walking around the room, you'll start to be able to hear the beat of the music and you'll start to be able to connect with that. You can do things that are even more difficult to get you even better is to walk backwards. Make sure there's no furniture and things so you don't crash and fall. But when you walk backwards, it's a little harder. And so you can't, again, you're going to turn off your intellect, you're going to turn off the fear response because it's more difficult. Your body has to work harder to walk backwards. So there are these little neurological tricks you can do to calm down and get a more calm mental focus. Did that answer the question?
Absolutely, yeah. It's unique in ways in which you can turn off different parts of your brain in order to activate others. It's one of these tools that can bring about many different ways in which you can become more aware in other areas that you might not really know about. And I think that's why it's a complex tool in order to create that change. And in terms of sensory awareness, in terms of the music and the arts, in what ways does that strengthen our senses and our ability to become aware of, our own senses?
Right. Now, this is a really fascinating thing for our culture, particularly in the United States, although I think a lot of Western cultures have the same issues. Um, every art that you do involves one aspect of your senses more heavily than others. So, for example, obviously, if you're coloring or if you're painting, you're using a lot of your visual senses. You're also using spatial senses. You're also getting something tactile by the way you're holding the pen or pencil or paintbrush or whatever it is. Um, if you're doing dance, that's a completely different thing because that is almost entirely spatial awareness. But it's also a lot of information about your brain. I mean, unconsciously is collecting a lot of information about how to move your muscles and your skeleton, and your hearing because you're hearing the beat in order to dance, you have to dance to something, usually. Dancing without is also good. And then photography, again, is spatial awareness, and that's why photography works. And then music and singing, as I said before, it's just about every sense you have. So it's tactile, excuse me, it's tactile, it's auditory, and it's visual as well. And there's probably other senses in there too that we don't really talk about very much. But when you do these activities, the only way you can accomplish them is by being being aware of these senses. And you can get better at them by learning how to focus on those senses. So when we talk about the word, for example, visualize, a painter is visualizing what is going to come out of their hand, even if it's just in the moment of doing it. But at any rate, that they're working on their painting, there's a lot of visual sense. So it's in a part of their mind where they can see it in their mind. It's not really there. It's a visualizing. It's imagination. Michelangelo used to say that when he was carving sculptures, he was simply uncovering them, that they were in the marble and he was just taking off pieces to show the statue. So that's how strong his sense of visualization was. It was so powerful in him that he could just see things that and make it happen because he went with that focus towards that visual sense. And the same thing with singing. We have the ability to, in music, we have the ability to to use our imagination for the sound. In my book, I made up words for these things because we don't have words. We don't have a word like visualize for hearing. So I called it auticizing, because just to help people have something to hang on to. So you can auticize just like you can visualize. So you can hear the tone and the tone quality in your imagination before you sing or before you touch the instrument. And then we also have the ability to memorize how things feel. I mean, to remember, or sorry, remember how things feel. For example, if you like animals, if you have a dog or a cat, and you know touching their fur, it's very calming and relaxing for us. Well, you can recall that sensation. You can call that feel. Don't have to touch the dog or the cat. You remember how they feel. And that ability to remember our senses is extremely powerful in our ability to build skills in many areas of our life and our ability to develop a calm mental focus. So that when you are stressed or you're having panic or anxiety or depression, remembering those sensory things can pull you, you know, along the road to getting out away from that.
Absolutely. And with what you're speaking about, a lot of it can be tangible things that you can see firsthand. Some of these senses, some of these changes, these physical changes, as we're speaking about. And earlier you mentioned how there were some parents that came up to you and said, thank you for what you did, for the change that you made within my child. And in speaking more about some of the things that maybe you weren't able to physically see in terms of the changes that happens within, whether someone's improved their singing or improved the way that they have been able to create art, in what ways does music and the arts help us to become more aware of ourselves and change just the way we interact with people, the way that we just carry ourselves, and what measures do we see those,
Mhm.
those not physical changes within someone's, behavioral patterns and such?
Uh-huh. This is a fabulous question. One of my clients is a professional musician, and he's very well known. He's a national touring artist. He's had a career for many years. I started teaching him later in life, so I think he was 48 or 49 when we first started teaching, working together. After the first 8 months or so, 7 or 8 months, I went to one of his concerts at Madison Square Garden to coach him before the concert because he was going to have a solo, and it was going to be his first solo with his newly trained voice after many years of singing one way. He was changing it. So I was there at Madison Square Garden, and he introduced me to his mother. And his mother came up to me and grabbed me by the shoulders and she said, "What have you done with my son?" And so it's not only children. And again, it's not me, it's the process. It's the process. And so what happened and what made her notice that? She's not a singer, she's not a musician. She's been watching her son perform for 35 years, and she's a mom, so the moms always know. Um, he carries himself completely differently. He feels better on stage, and he moves around better, and his relationships are better because he's calmer and able to have less knee-jerk reactions in many situations. Why does this happen? And why do people who are very shy or people who have ADD, why do they develop this confidence? Well, a lot of these things that are going on with us are fear-based, right? We talked about trauma, and that's a special fear-based reaction that's happened because of neurological changes. But humans have all kinds of other fears, and all those fears are meant to help us survive in the wild, and they're not so useful in modern culture. They actually stop us from doing things, and they give us limiting beliefs. So it becomes like a vicious circle. You get afraid of something, and then you can't do it as well because you've cut off your sensory awareness. You can't do it as well. Excuse me, phlegm allergy season. You can't do it as well, and so you start to lose your confidence. And then you get more scared. And then you can't do it as well, and then you lose more confidence. And it's this vicious circle. And this can not only happen with singers and musicians, but it can happen in any aspect of our lives. And this is why you get kids, teenagers, and high school students who have had trouble in school because of their anxiety, or people who are having trouble advancing in their careers at work, and they're doing their jobs really well, but they can't go further because of these limiting things that happen because of the fear. So how does singing and music change that, change our behaviors? It creates clarity, mental clarity. So when you train, I'm not talking about just singing in the shower, which is also good. It's for different reasons. But when you talk about training a skill of an instrument or singing, you're building very specific neural pathways, and it creates tremendous clarity in your mind because you are focusing on your visualizing, your audicizing, your tactilizing. And when you do this over and over again, you do your scales, you do your songs, and you stay in these moments of sensing the space around you, hearing the sound in the space around you, and feeling what's happening with the way you say the words and the way the resonance is moving through your body. Your mind gets clear. And when your mind is clear and all the chatter has stopped, you get more confident. And then when you get more confident, you get more capable of doing things. And when you get more capable of doing things, you get less afraid. And then you start the vicious circle in a nice way. So what happens is you become better in your life, you're more confident about making decisions, you start to understand what relationships are working for you, what are not working for you, because you can then feel it, because you're not living in this state of anxiety or depression. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's great because you're not looking through it in one lens. As you're saying, you're using
Mm.
many different senses and many different perspectives in order to see ways in which you can better yourself and bring about new changes. And in terms of when you're working with a client and trying to help them, use these many different tools in order to create change, obviously things won't change overnight. And obviously you're not just telling them to practice and just to focus on X, Y, and Z. In speaking about how you're working with a client, what are some ways in which you're able to help them, develop some of these skills in order to, bring about the changes that we're speaking about? Because it's not as we're saying that you're saying, all right, here, go and practice this song this way, and you'll be a completely new person. Speak about some of the ways in which you're able to, develop some of the skills and even the perspective changes for, a person to develop themselves not only as a musician or as an artist, but into, a developed person as well.
Okay, another great question. Um, so I work very technically. with singers, and they don't know that any of these things are not part of the discussion unless the person is really interested. If the person's really interested, we talk about it. But if you work on a scale, for example, singing a scale, and we use in singing, the primary way that we affect changes in the voice is through vowels. And so every language has slightly different vowels, and every cultural region has its own set of vowels. So people from Boston talk really badly, and people from the South have a different accent, and from the West, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're going to train your voice to sing, the easiest and fastest way to be able to move back and forth easily in your voice and not get stuck or feel uncomfortable is to sing with clear vowels. And because of our speaking habits, we generally don't have clear vowels. So Italians have clear vowels. Highly educated British people have clear vowels, and the rest of us have all this mishmash. So when you're training your voice to move easily back and forth, you would, for example, take a vowel oo. And to make a clear oo vowel, you use lips in a shape that's like whistling. So if you were to whistle, that is going to give you the perfect architecture in your mouth to have really nice resonance. So that seems so simple, but if you've never used these muscles before, it's really hard. And so you might say, sing ooh, and you go, and you can't say the ooh. So you have to practice in order to be able to say that ooh and sing it through your voice, through your range, in the whistle lip shape. So most people cannot do that right away because of our speaking habits. So by focusing on the ooh and practicing to sing in your whistle lips, you don't really have time to think about it and get nervous or shy or anxious because you're too busy trying to make a whistle lips. It's not easy. It's kind of like, it's like doing this thing that if you're, well, you can't see me there, but if you're doing this thing where you are, you know what I'm talking about, the circle on your stomach and the pounding on your head, it's coordination. And just like the bicycle, it's a lot of coordination. And so you can't be analyzing things when you're trying to do something that's a complex coordination. So by focusing on something simple like make whistle lips, and even if you're nervous or you have anxiety issues, you can do that. We're human. Anybody can do it. And another example is trying to change the resonance of your voice. So a lot of people come in and they don't like the way their voice sounds for whatever reason, or they're having pitchiness, so that the sound isn't exactly on the right notes. Might be a little under or a little over. And that has a lot of, reasons I could explain anatomically, but it's not important for the singer to do that. It's important for the singer to focus on that resonance. So how do they do that? The easiest way is to think about making a funny sound. So if you go make a sound that's like a witch, and you go, nay, 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 well, we don't do that in normal life. We do when we're children. Children make lots of funny noises all the time. Children are very free with their voices. If you go to a playground, you can find out quickly how loud it is there and how free they are with their voices. But when we grow up, we don't want to make funny noises anymore. We don't want to go, nay, nay, nay. You sound ridiculous. People think I'm crazy. Well, if you do that, you're changing the way you hear things, and you're focusing on something that you can't do intellectually. You can't figure it out, and you can only try and make the sound. And so as you try and make the sound, you're developing your sensory awareness for sound, for hearing things. So that's how we do it. So if you think, I'm going to go home and make funny sounds and not do anything else but make funny sounds, and a week later you can manage your voice a lot better, and you're more able to focus because you've been making a funny sound for all week.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate that. And, with that being said, and what we've been speaking about so far, we've been speaking about, singing in the arts and being able to develop calmness and sensory awareness. How can this can play effect into, how we can take control and see those physical changes, as well as, some of those changes that we might not physically see. And, with that being said, in this next part of the episode, we'll be speaking about what role survival instincts can play in skill development, So please be sure to tune into this next part of the episode where we'll be speaking about that topic. But for now, this was season 2, episode number 24 with Linda Balliro. And we'll have her website below in the show notes so you can see more about the work that she's doing, as well as her book that she briefly spoke about. And be sure to tune into the next episode where we'll be speaking more about these topics. So thank you all again. And this was your host, Brendan Cutuli.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Mental Insights Podcast. Make sure to reach out to today's guest or myself if you need any advice, guidance, or support in your life today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and review to this podcast so we know what you thought of this episode. I look forward to being in touch with you all in the next episode. I hope you all have a wonderful day.